today's topic, we are talking with Dr. Erika La Vella again, who is our microbiome presenter and is giving her time monthly now for those that weren't a part of the last webinar to discuss the microbiome and relationships to all sorts of things that do tie back to menopause and our target population here at Gennev. So today, Erika and I are both excited for this topic. I know, knowing that we've talked about it together a lot. We are going to be talking about foods and the microbiome. And as a registered dietitian nutritionist, I love the science of food, but when we talk about food and what we eat, I get really excited because who doesn't like eating? And when we talk about the food, see, Erika can't wait either. I mean, she's a surgeon, but she also loves food. So a topic near and dear to our hearts is what we're going to be diving into today. For those of you, if this is your first microbiome webinar that you're joining us for, we will be going over some basic information, but I encourage you to also go back and listen to the other webinar series that we've done with Erika so that you can get some of the information that we're going to continue building on in this series. So I am Kasianchuk, and I am the Director of Health Coaching here at Gennev. I'm a registered dietitian and exercise physiologist, and excited to talk with Erika again today. Erika, for those audience members that may not know you or those that need a review, let us know who you are.
Sure. Well, you have my name, Erika La Vella. I am a current practicing bariatric surgeon and general surgeon. So bariatrics means I do surgery for weight loss. And it's actually the perfect merriment because my undergraduate degree and passions were in nutrition and psychology. So I just really love all of those subjects, right? How do we eat? How do we move? How do we make behavior changes, choices, things like that, so we can be the best versions of ourselves. So that's my day job.
Excellent. Well, we thank you again for taking time out of your day job to join us with your wealth of information related to the microbiome. As we go into this, like I said, I think it would be great if we can give some basics, so a recap on the microbiome and maybe even your, based off of your work and your experience, how you came to really having this passion and having done all this research around the microbiome.
Yeah, so I was afflicted with gastrointestinal issues when I was in medical school. And I ended up finding a functional medicine practitioner who ran a battery of tests on me and really helped me connect the dots between my own internal biochemistry and how microorganisms and parasites in my gastrointestinal tract were having a negative impact on me. At the root of all of that was the extreme profound stress that medical school can put on you. And so over the last 10 years, I have recovered my gut function, but also taken that really scientific and inquisitive mind and applied so many other layers. It's like I went through all these dramatic changes during that time, graduated medical school, couple relationship changes, got into residency program. General surgery residency is also quite stressful, but then also balancing in where does sleep and where does self-care show up. And now that's really fueled my desire to stay very current on the research, but also help educate others. Because when I was at the brink of my uttermost saddest, lowest points during my gastrointestinal distress, it was as much of a psychological, behavioral health. I've had depression, I had anxiety, I had intermittent constipation, diarrhea, doubled over and abdominal pain. It literally affected every single aspect of my life, including professionally and my personal and professional relationships. So now that I have all of me back together and have really dialed in my most favorite career and loving family, and I'm a mother, and anyway, I'm just very attuned and excited to help teach others the magical powers of the human gut microbiome and how having a healthy gut can really help every other aspect of your life.
Excellent. Oh, thank you. And what would you say, as far as a basics of understanding what is the microbiome? How do you explain that when maybe an introduction to your patients that you work with or individuals that you're starting off to understand?
Yeah, so the microbiome by definition is this ecosystem of bacteria that live all over the human body. But it's not just the presence of these organisms, it's actually these organisms and the genes, so the actual genetics and the function of those genes, and then the interplay that that function then has on you, their host. And so it really is this really, really broad concept. And it's not just bacteria, but we talk a lot about bacteria. It's also viruses. In fact, viruses are believed or estimated to outnumber bacteria 100 to 1. But we don't really have the sequencing or the technology to study that in real time. So right now, a lot of our science is focused on these bacteria, but it's also fungi. And when we say fungi, we mean fungus, or like, mushroom is a type of fungus. So different types of yeast. And so Saccharomyces species, which helps make barley into beer and grapes into wine. It also is what helps make your kombucha. And so these are different types of yeasts, and these yeasts also live in your body. So it's at large this constellation of how all of these things from our environment, what we're eating, what we're taking in, these microorganisms, they're not necessarily only living in us. The same microorganisms that have been found in the human gut have also been found in the bottom of ocean core samples, which is kind of amazing. So it really is this fabric all over the earth that is these microorganisms at really this microscopic level that are helping us as humans and other animals and plants actually evolve and even have existence. So I view bacteria and these microorganisms as our ancestors, because really they are, on the scheme of everything, looking all the way back into history, they really are the first living organisms on this planet. And I think for a long time, as soon as science became very reductionistic, we started just giving humans all these magical powers. But when we look at it under a microscope, everything that we thought the human body did, turns out these bacteria.
Erica, I think I may have just been for me, but I think you cut out a little bit, and all I heard, you were talking about turns out the bacteria, if you could finish that
Oh,
sentence, just in
yes.
case it
So
was not
the
just me.
bacteria are doing all of our biological processes for us.
Excellent. All
Yeah.
right. Well, thanks for that summary there. And in that, you started to talk about some food things. So let's jump in. And what is the benefit of foods to the microbiome? I know working with clients, even yesterday I had a client say, what probiotics should I be taking? And I told her to make sure to watch this webinar
Yes,
first.
yes, yes.
So I think we hear so much about the microbiome. We see all of these probiotics in the supplement aisle now. What about food? Why do we want to focus on food for the microbiome?
Yeah. To even kind of like set the stage about probiotics or not, but there's different layers to our anatomy and different like functions. So the bacteria live on the surface of the gut. And then right below that is a thick mucus layer. And that is where our body and what we eat and all these different interplay. But you want a really healthy mucus layer because that helps keep bad bacteria out, but it also helps serve as like a home for healthy bacteria. Mm-hmm. And then below that is where we have our actual intestinal cellular tissue. And then within that intestinal cellular tissue, our immune system lives right under that. And so science is really zooming in on the interplay between these layers of our digestive tract, almost like agricultural science zooms in on the layers of soil science. So at the top layers where you have this soft layer, and then down deeper is where you get the root systems and you get the layers of sediment. It's kind of very similar. And so I use a lot of soil science analogies to describe what's going on in the human gut, because within our soil, within our root systems, is where you also see these bacteria, these probiotics, Probiotics haven't always came in capsules. They've always come spontaneously from the soil, and being attached to the surface of plants that we get from the soil. So food matters because for as long as time has ever existed, bacteria have evolved to basically be alive with plants and with soil. So when we eat plant foods, we are feeding these gut bacteria the natural products that they have always co-evolved with and eaten. And a probiotic is merely the type of bacteria. Maybe it's a specific strain, right? So if you've got your probiotic capsule there in front of you, it'll say lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, and a handful of other ones. These types of bacteria are what are commonly found in food products like kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir, and in yogurt products.
Excellent. Well, that's important to classify. I appreciate you calling out that probiotics weren't just invented when we saw the supplements hit the store shelves.
Nope.
They've been around in natural forms, in live things. And I think that's another important thing to show, that the foods we eat are living. Even the plants and the plant-based foods are living, and the nutrients that they provide come from living things, including the probiotic sources. Yes. Well, let's jump right into the food. I know you and I are both dying to do that. So when you think of foods to support the microbiome, which ones come to mind? Which ones do you see as being high priority, or they get those gold stars?
Yeah. So I'm sure people are starting to clue into the marketing and the language in and around probiotic products. There's now something called a symbiotic, which is funny to me because it's a prebiotic plant-based food fiber blended into a capsule with a probiotic bacteria. You don't need that. All you have to do is think about eating a variety of plants. The Human Microbiome, Human Gut Project, which is a collection of stool samples from healthy volunteers all over the world, but namely in America, has really kind of mapped out that those who eat the most diversity of plants in their diet have some of the healthiest of gut microbiomes. And the number that they kind of came up with, or that is commonly cited, is 30. 30 different plants. And that doesn't mean you need to eat massive servings of these things. It's just the diversity. And I call that out as concept number one, because each different plant has different properties on the biochemical analysis, if you will. And what makes plants so special is their complexity and their antioxidants and their fibers. And so the more diverse our diet, the more diverse the organisms in which we're going to be growing. So there's certain bacterial organisms that, for example, love garlic. They love onions. They love leeks. They love a prebiotic class of foods called that are rich in inulin. So jicama, asparagus, artichokes, as just one example of a class of plant-based foods that are really rich in this prebiotic fiber. So you're going to see prebiotics out there in the marketing sphere as well. And then you're going to start seeing something called a symbiotic. Again, just by opening your awareness to the value that food brings you, not just from a weight loss perspective, which is what I'm constantly counseling my patients on. There's a difference between the mindset for restricted eating and counting a calorie than there is from the abundance that comes from, I want to grow a really healthy garden in my gut, and I'm going to do that by actually eating more. But you're going to be eating more things, more plants that add value to your body. And at the biochemical level, I kind of broke it down. I took some notes here so I didn't get distracted. But so I already mentioned prebiotic foods. Another supplement that you're going to see out there is fiber supplements. So you can actually buy inulin as a fiber supplement. And in my patients, those that have had weight loss surgery, I do encourage them to have fiber supplements because their stomachs are now surgically much, much smaller. It's hard for them to eat a significant amount of fiber in whole food form. So I don't think that supplementation on a fiber front is a bad thing. But if you have a fully working, functional, large stomach and you can fill it up with a lot of plant-based food, then there's really no reason that you won't have to spend money on these things either. But what you're going to see on the back of some of these fiber supplements is FOS, which stands for fructooligosaccharides. And you're also going to see GOS, which stands for galactooligosaccharides. Again, that's biochemistry boringness, but I know it's making Stacy's heart really happy to hear those words come out of my mouth.
That's so exciting.
You're like, oh. But both of those, they kind of fall into two classes. So the GOS tends to be more your legumes and your beans. And so remember, a cashew is actually a legume. It's not a nut, which means it's actually higher in carbohydrates, which some people, when they abide by low carbohydrate diets, they tell themselves that they can't eat cashews. But the reality is cashews can add a lot of value to your body and to your gut, namely in this form of this prebiotic fiber, galactooligosaccharides. Same thing with soybeans. And I know we've talked about soy being somewhat controversial when we're talking about menopause and estrogen. But I'm not necessarily proposing that somebody only eats soy. Again, it's this diversity. You know, how many different plants can you eat in a day? How many different plants can you eat in one meal? Gosh, I made tacos the night before last, and I was just so smitten with myself. We had 14 different plants in our tacos.
Wow.
I know.
Pretty impressive.
Pretty impressive, right?
Yeah.
So any way that you can work to increase diversity, try a new plant, and then keep kind of introducing those plant-based foods on a semi-regular schedule, right? So every couple of weeks, you batch cook a little bit of quinoa or freekeh. If you guys know what freekeh is, it's a delicious, nutty little whole grain. Each different plant grain, bean, legume, every single plant has value for the body.
Excellent. No, that's such a good point in terms of that diversity concept. I want to go back to the 30 different plants recommendation. Now, is that per day, per week? What did the American Gut Study find?
Yeah, so per week.
Okay.
So 30 different plants per week.
All right.
Is kind of the loose recommendation there.
Okay.
Taco recipe.
Yes. Well, and I was just going to comment on the fact that you added, you were almost at half your week just the other night in one meal. And I wondered too, I think it's a great point, Erika, that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from previous conversations, and knowing your schedule, I'm guessing you didn't spend all day making those tacos. I could be wrong.
No.
So why don't you share, what was the recipe? What did you put together? And were you thinking about increasing the diversity of the plate, or did it just happen? What was that like for you?
So I'm always thinking about how can I add plant diversity to my day, always. But yes, I am a very busy person. And so, Trader Joe's is a working mom's best friend. What they have right now is they even have little jicama slices. I don't know if you guys have seen these. It's pretty amazing because it literally is really thin sliced jicama to the point where you can actually use it as a taco. Like it'll actually be your flour. I eat flour, but I was just so excited to see jicama pre-sliced this way, especially because most of my patients are prescribed very low carbohydrate diets to help them with type 2 diabetes and obesity. But so what I always look for is I'm a texture-based person. So I definitely had my black beans. I had green chilies. I had sweet potato, which I grated. So grating sweet potato raw and then just throwing it into the pan and then spicing it up with like cumin and paprika and, cayenne, garlic, things like that. So again, and then leek. So I used leek. You can use onion as well. Leek, onion, and garlic are all in that allium family, as what Mary said last week, which is a very potent prebiotic, inulin-rich fiber foods. I had cilantro. I had, gosh, what else did I have in there? That's only like 4.
Maybe some tomatoes?
Definitely tomatoes. I had yellow tomatoes. We definitely had peppers. We had zucchini. We had kale. We had kohlrabi. So basically all these different textures of foods. So my garden's kind of popping right now. So whatever's growing in my garden went in there. And then, so I had tons of different greens. So we had chard and kale, spinach. Again, it's not necessarily about the volume, but I did batch cook a bunch of this, put it in a big old pan, and then just kept like tossing it with tongs as the spices and the seasons were kind of wilting the sweet potato and cooking the beans. But I used canned beans. I didn't take the time to, suck them out there. And with canned food, back to Mary last week, she mentioned intoxicants. And so, the lining of cans is known to have BPA in them traditionally. So I just make sure I rinse them really, really, really good. And I look for brands that tell me that they use BPA-free cans, like Amy's. Amy's is a brand that uses BPA-free cans. But yeah, so as many vegetables as you can.
And I think it's such a good point, Erika, that to not be afraid to experiment and throwing different things in. And tacos or Mexican food often allows that experimenting base. If you're building a taco or making fajitas, something like a salsa, even if you buy the salsa, you're typically going to have tomatoes, peppers, onions, garlic, cilantro, lime. So there's 5 or 6
Exactly.
plants right in there. So that can be something to think about in terms of kind of how do you, again, make the most of, it's efficiently eating. And then how can you sprinkle and different things together? And the cooking technique to cook things down can certainly concentrate the flavors, and it allows you to get more within that if you're really looking for that diversity piece.
Yeah. And I've just grown to relax that I'm not going to stress about cooking all the nutritional content out of my food. Mm-hmm. I'm cooking it because it's culinarily necessary for me to enjoy this food. So I'm not a huge raw foodist person. I'm not, it just really relax into it. I mean, people have been cooking food all over the world in 5-star Michelin restaurants. Delicious for a very, very long time. So, gentle cooking, steaming, doing it on the oven, stovetop. But yeah, they were quite delicious tacos. And I have a meat eating husband. Cabbage. So I use 3 different kinds of cabbage in there as well. So there's 3 different types of cabbage plants for you.
There you go. And I think that's a great point to also bring up in terms of the cooking process. I often have clients that are like, is it bad to cook certain vegetables? And does that mean I'm eating processed foods? And what if I'm blending and I use the same approach that, there's some food you really need to cook beans. I mean, if they're already canned, they're already cooked. But we can't eat dry beans. We're not going to eat dry rice. So there is a purpose for cooking. And it does come down to how do you enjoy that food? If you enjoy the way it's cooked, then you're more likely to eat it. And that's going to be more successful long term. And same thing with the variety of foods. Use a variety of cooking methods. Maybe you do have more cooked vegetables one night, and then the next night they're more raw or in salad form.
Yeah. So my black bean, sweet potato, onions, garlic, and kale medley, I also put that in its own separate Tupperware container and have brought it to work for the last 2 days for lunch. And then I've been bringing fresh greens. And so each day I make a salad, it gets a big old spoonful of the beans and the sweet potatoes and, at least 5 or 6 different veggies that I cooked from 2 nights ago. So I'm also stretching out the foods that I'm eating, and really cutting down time and making sure I'm showing up for work with really healthy food too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it saves on time, can save on having to get lunch out if you're at work, and then you're multitasking that one meal that might have taken a little bit more time to prepare, but you're saving all that time down the road as well, thinking forward. Well, that's a great example of ways to incorporate a lot of different vegetables, a lot of fiber-rich foods. Let's take a step back, just in case there's any of our audience members that are like, oh my God, 14 plants in one meal. How could I ever do that? And I wouldn't know the first thing about sauteing sweet potatoes. What would you say to someone they really want to start with the basics of increasing fiber-rich foods in their current nutrition regimen? What are some great first steps for them to take?
So I guess practically, I think about what types of foods I need to eat when and where. So if I am, for example, post-workout, something that you kind of just want to like grab or snack on, kind of within that first like hour, apples, bananas, cashews, nuts, right? All of those are very high fiber foods. In fact, bananas are also rich in inulin, and apples are also rich in the FOS. So, and the other thing that you have to think about is all these plants, not only do they have fibers in them, but they also have antioxidants and other fun biochemistry words like polyphenols and flavonoids. And just think about it being a biochemical that only brings you more health, more energy, more vitality. But yeah, so I think about the texture of the food and then also like the context in which I'm going to eat it. So, leafy greens, they are fantastic foods. You can eat them raw or cooked, depending on the thickness and the darker the green. I typically do cook those. I wilt them down a little bit. So like on top of my beans and my sweet potatoes, which are thicker, fibrous texture, right? Everybody knows they can't eat a raw bean, just like we talked about. You can't necessarily bite into a raw sweet potato. It tastes gross. It has leaves a film in your teeth, and there's no flavor there. There's no sweetness there either. So those foods I know I have to cook longer, and I cook them and I sample them, kind of like how we cook pasta, right? You try to go to the al dente type texture. And then, so like greens, I wilt them on top. Onions, you can always cook onions and reduce them down. Almost every culture of cooking, whether it's Italian, Indian, whenever you have a bean dish, you always cook your onions first. You add your spices with it. You add your oil or your butter or ghee to that, and that makes a little paste, and you really wilt those down, and that also provides excellent flavor. So don't know if I answered your question. I feel like I'm getting more like chefy on you, but it is important that you cook to what you like. And you have to stay actively engaged as you're preparing these foods, because it is stovetop cooking. It's not put it in the oven, set it and forget it. We're not doing bakes and casseroles. You can roast some things. You can definitely roast sweet potatoes. You can roast broccoli. I love roasted broccoli, but that's a little more simple. You just kind of set the timer, 350 degrees, check on it in 15 minutes, flip it over, a little sea salt, and you're kind of done. Maybe a little lemon juice on the top. I do find that when you're cooking with vegetables, it's so fun to let the plants be the star. And even the flavor of roasted broccoli, the flavor of roasted beets, all of these things, they have their own flavor and they bring their own character to it. Something like, I don't know if you guys have watched the Salt, Sugar, Fat documentary on Netflix. Do you watch that? It's good.
I have not yet. We have the book, but I don't have.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of beautiful, but it really does cater to like these being the most basic taste profiles. And when you have the right amount of that saltiness, so sometimes that's like using a seaweed or a nori, or a little bit of sea salt, and then the right amount of acid. So acid can come in, vinegars. So apple cider vinegar, fantastic for the gut microbiome. Lemon, lime, definitely your citrus flavors, also very good for the microbiome. These vinegars are really high in antioxidants and polyphenols. And so just as they're really good for our cells, again, remember, think of these biochemistry words that we're saying is in terms of antioxidants is something that can only give your cell more energy. And that's exactly what you're trying to do. Every time we're eating, we're trying to give our cells more energy. But yeah, so I love cooking. I've been doing it for, I don't know, 15 years or so now. And, it started with my first nutrition class, and you really realize, wow, in order to take really good care of myself, it really kind of starts in the kitchen and the garden.
Good, and we'll get to that too here in today's webinar. I think, one of the takeaways from what you said, Erika, is that there is this experimentation, and not to be afraid to experiment with taste and flavor profiles, and also not to be afraid to try just one ingredient. So if you are looking to increase more fiber-rich foods, is there a way that with what you're making for dinner tonight or sometime this week, can you experiment with adding onions if the recipe doesn't call for it, or if it's not already in there? Or maybe you add more and see what that flavor profile happens. Or like you said, experiment with your broccoli, your cauliflower, even roasted potatoes, roasted sweet potatoes, and just put those in the oven with salt and pepper. It doesn't have to be this complex level of seasonings. Yes, seasonings and herbs have benefits, but start simple and then experiment to your taste. I think a lot of people get so confined with recipes. They have their place, but we don't get in the kitchen, maybe make mistakes, but you learn from those, and then you're going to learn over time and you'll get more comfortable.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the garden aspect. You mentioned at the beginning, probiotics are in our soil. That's how they get to the live food that we eat. Where does gardening come in? What does that look like if you have space for a garden, and what if you don't?
Yeah. So there have been, literally an explosion of research centered around the, probiotic bacteria in our environment, not just in our bodies, not just in the capsules that we've been supplementing with or in the food products, but also in the soil. And I told you how there was one study that actually I think came out of Oregon State University right here in Corvallis, where they found that in the ocean core samples, because there's a big oceanography department here, that they were actually able to find bacteria that had the same metabolic function as some bacteria that are in the human gut. And the human gut is actually the most diverse ecosystem in terms of bacteria. So the most numbers of different types of bacteria concentrated to one location is right in our guts. So we're kind of this magical niche ecosystem, and the whole planet is right here inside of us. Excuse me. So I started getting really excited about soil science when the crossover data was coming out. And then also that historical reflection of where are these foods coming from? And what came up for me is just the, even the practice of making miso. So miso is a fantastic probiotic food. In fact, I make a miso vinaigrette, which is so simple. It's just miso, honey, because I eat sugar, honey, and lemon juice. And the three of those things blended together, drizzled on anything, is absolute heaven. And I also like that recipe because miso, if you overcook it, you do have to wonder, are you denaturing? Are you disrupting this process of killing bacteria? So I like the idea of using it raw, but you can also, you can marinate things in miso. Leave it in the fridge and marinate it. Anyway, miso is a very, very potent probiotic. It's fermented soybeans. It's called a koji spore. Just a little fun fact for you there. But so, these ancient traditions of where fermented foods come from, really had me at the bigger level kind of like just extrapolate, oh, okay, well then how can I build my environment around me to foster the growth of these organisms? At a major microbiome university panel that I watched, I asked some of the panelists, I'm like, so what have you learned? How can you apply this microbiome science to your life? And they all said, I can be a little bit dirtier and it's going to be okay. Because what we're doing is we're over sanitizing everything. And when we do that, we actually kill these ecosystems. So one of the safest places to just have dirt and be dirty is in and around growing plants. And I love microbiome science because it also really connects humans to the earthly experience in the broader context of, are we doing what's right for our planet? So gardening can be very simple. You can have houseplants, increasing your number of houseplants. Houseplants actually also live in this symbiotic relationship with humans. We breathe out carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is like oxygen to them, and they push out oxygen. So then we breathe in their oxygen. So just like we have that relationship to plants, we also have a similar relationship to bacteria. So when bacteria eat the foods that we eat, they then breathe out or poop out a chemical byproduct called a short chain fatty acid, which acts as an energy source for our colon cells. So that is one of the many ways where, or examples of how we just can't live without these bacteria.
Yeah.
So in the oh, go ahead. Would you have something to say?
Well, I liked how the plants. I mean, that's another thing that if you are feeling intimidated with getting in the kitchen, get some houseplants. And and I think that's another way that, again, looking at how the environment can support the microbiome. It's not just the food we eat, but where the food's coming from and other things. One thing, and as a physician, I know you may appreciate this right now as well. You talked about being a little dirtier, and the garden being a safe place to do that. That sounds great right now. We can all go play in the dirt, get dirty, and then wash our hands appropriately with soap and water after that. As far as we're doing a lot of sanitation right now with COVID-19, and there's real reasons to.
Yes.
What's your perspective? What's the fine balance that we should be working there when it comes to our microbiome and our immune system?
Yeah. So again, I think number one, we're all trying to really help protect each other from the spread of germs. And we know that by me coughing on my hand or me rubbing my face, it would be wrong of me to not go wash my hands in the sink before I get back out there and start touching patients or, accepting germs from them. But this idea of germs and this idea of needing to protect ourselves is also somewhat damaging to our immune systems from the microbiome perspective, not necessarily as grown adults, but when we try to over sterilize young children's lives and their early experiences. So when we look at the development of the microbiome and the development of the immune system, they actually parallel. So the mode of delivery that a baby was born into, the early childhood exposures to pets in the home. So having pets in the home is actually associated with having a better diversity and a healthier gut microbiome. It's also associated with lower incidences of allergies and asthma in children. So again, we're not talking about like getting dirty and being sick and rubbing your snot on other people so that they can get infected with your COVID or your flu. But what we're talking about is, if there's no gross contamination and there's no gross symptomatic, and when I say gross, I don't mean, anyway, we talk about that in medicine as being like the obvious. So gross means obvious in medicine. Sterilize them before in and out of procedures. But then I also go home and I'll pull beets out of my garden and dig in the dirt and, shake off their roots. And then I go to the kitchen and I wash them off and then I grate them. But I'm not like, I don't necessarily bleach things. And so, actually to speak to what Mary said last week, a lot of our household cleaners have also intoxicants in them. And so we do need to be careful about that exposure there. Good old fashioned vinegar is a great cleaner and can get the job done, reducing contaminants while also not being harmful or toxic to your body. So yeah, absolutely love gardening. And in fact, I read a press release once, and I dove a little bit into the research, but the same microorganisms that are in our soil, lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, things that we find in our probiotic capsules, live in and on the root systems of our plants and help provide nutriment to our plants, as well as, when we eat them. We get them by eating plants that are closest to soil. So if you don't have your own garden at home, that is, kind of organically tended to, buying from a farmer's market is actually one of the next best things that you can do. And you don't have to wash it. You don't have to. I choose not to, but that's my choice because I like my dirty life. But in the soil and from those lactobacillus organisms, from those bifidobacteria organisms, there is also a metabolite of serotonin. So serotonin is also a metabolite that plants find helpful. I don't know a lot about the plant metabolism, but the headline was that gardening and getting that dirt on your hands and those microorganisms on your hands and that serotonin metabolites on your hands is as good of an antidepressant as a oral pill.
All right, so there could be a lot there.
Could be a lot there.
Yeah, certainly a lot of components with that, but it's also it's no harm in trying in terms of
yeah. I just, again, the fact that serotonin, it is a byproduct of these microorganisms. The microorganisms in our body make 95% of our human use serotonin. And the fact that it's found in soil and in soil metabolites means that there's just more of a bigger role for serotonin than to just be an antidepressant.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, coming back to everything being so connected.
Yes.
And a great also point too around, can you support a local farmer's market or a local farm stand? And recognizing with our viewers being all over the country, these may or may not be accessible to you, but are there options that you can explore even if you're just going to buy one new vegetable at a farmer's market? Again, that's more diversity, that's more inclusion of those natural probiotics than if you hadn't made that choice. So those are great simple steps that can also be taken.
Yes. And literally, there is not a bad plant.
There you go.
Not
Excellent.
one.
Yes. So I think that that's important to, really just look at how you can increase this idea of the more diverse things you're taking in supports more that diverse environment in the gut. You mentioned miso as a fermented option. You've also touched on kefir, yogurt, and you even talked about beer and wine. Where do fermented foods play a role? How do they support the microbiome as well?
Yeah. So before we had labs that would encapsulate probiotics, and before we had refrigeration, before we had pasteurization, we also didn't have the scientific techniques to even really know what was happening under the surface. But largely, we didn't have to create a supplementation field because they were just everywhere around us. So when people used to have the family cow, and they'd go out and they'd milk their cow and they'd bring in their milk and they'd separate the cream from the top and they'd churn their butter. What they would leave behind, and they would leave it on the kitchen counter because they didn't have ice boxes, they didn't have refrigeration, that would wildly ferment. When we say wild fermentation, it means it wasn't inoculated. So even wine is a 2,000+ year old practice. We didn't always have microbiology science to add yeasts or bacteria to create fermentation. We would just wait for fermentation to happen on its own. So I've been making sourdough bread, sourdough starter, filtered water, in flour, and you leave it on your kitchen counter. In about 5 days, 3 to 5 days, you have yeasted, fermenting sourdough. So it's always around us. And again, I think the more closer proximity we are to our own garden, where these organisms naturally kind of deposit in and around plants, and just like in our gut, where if I eat chickpeas, I'm going to start growing a very specific type of microorganism species that loves the chickpea fiber. If I grow these plants out in my garden, it's going to actually spawn or attract the growth of this very same organisms in the soil. So it's everywhere.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And again, more options that can be included. One thing I think it's important when we're talking about food, some of our audience members may have gotten really excited that they can get all their probiotics from beer and wine. Where's the pro and con there? We're always supporting balance at Gennev, but when it comes to the microbiome, what does that look like?
Well, once it turns into alcohol, you actually don't get any of the benefit. But I am very curious. My husband's a winemaker or in the winemaking industry, almost a full-fledged winemaker. But I'm really curious because I have seen reports or analysis of the short-chain fatty acid, which is the postbiotic metabolite. This is where science is getting a little excited because as long as the organisms have been alive for a certain period of time, and they've had an ability to ferment and create this byproduct, how long is that byproduct, which is what is actually benefiting you? How long is that byproduct alive, viable, confers a health benefit? So in wine, the postbiotic metabolites aren't being they don't look the same as what is showing up in our stool or in our gut fermentation processes. And so really, once the alcohol level reaches a certain point, the yeasts are done fermenting and they die off and they reach into sediment at the bottom. So the reality is none, as far as we know. There's no health benefit to beer and wine drinking but there is a little bit, right? So a lot of population studies have found, especially Mediterranean cultures, 1 to 2 glasses of wine a day, depending on your body habitus. Isn't all that harmful. And Pinot Noir, we live in the Willamette Valley. We are one of the top Pinot Noir growers in the world. Pinot Noir actually has a really high concentration of an antioxidant called resveratrol. And antioxidants, which is another bonus that all plant foods have, the brighter the colors, the more richer the colors, all sorts of foods, berries, fruits, tree fruits, ground fruits. Every plant has an antioxidant in it, but Pinot Noir has one of the highest concentrations of resveratrol. It's actually the highest antioxidant wine. Does that mean that that is going to prevent a heart attack? I don't know, but studies do show that, alcohol in very limited moderation is actually healthy.
Yeah, we can see that consistently. And interesting, you brought up the cultures too, especially the more Mediterranean culture, because they also tend to have a lot of those fiber-rich foods that we're talking about here. So have your glass of wine with the wonderful salad and tacos that Erika talked about so that you know that you're getting the benefits of both of those.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's always important to call out again, what this shows is that there isn't a one shot, one food, one drink, one pill that is going to support the greatest microbiome. Again, we're talking about diversity, and in order to get diversity of that bacteria, you have to have diversity of the sources that are supplying it. So anything, if you leave the webinar with nothing else, if anyone's trying to sell you a pill that can do all of that, they're lying to you. Yeah. So we're not there yet as far as science goes in the pill, and hopefully as people that enjoy the food, I'm kind of hoping we don't get there. Like, let's enjoy all the food.
Are you familiar with the nutrition facts data guy, Dr. Greger?
Yes.
So he had a podcast on the microbiome that I listened to just a couple weeks ago, and he mentioned a study of astronauts. And so astronauts were up in space. Astronauts, they don't get fresh food up there. Everything's kind of freeze-dried, dehydrated, and just like what their microbiome diversity did coming back. Anyway, I found it very, very interesting. I want to dig up that study and look into that.
Can you give us the conclusion, or
I will. We'll save it for next time. I'll update the conclusion next time.
Okay. All right. That will be a future webinar so that all of our audience comes back here next month. Well, as we finish up, I just want to remind everyone that if you have any questions or even comments, go ahead and put them in the Q&A box if you're on Zoom, or the chat box. And then if you're on Facebook, you can thread those through the thread underneath the live. So in just recapturing what we've talked about here, summarization, it sounds like there's, keeping things simple, increase just the variety of foods in fiber-rich plant-based foods in your diet. Even if you're increasing that by 1 per week, that can make a difference. Don't be afraid to experiment in the kitchen. And then also including plants in some way, shape, or form. So that can be plants in your house. House plants are great. Starting a small garden, or looking for local sources to get foods that were grown in a garden nearby. And don't be afraid to play in the dirt. And enjoy exposure to dirt and soil, rather than fearing dirt, knowing that that dirt might be containing beneficial bacteria for your body. Anything I'm missing there?
No, honestly, that's it. So I had written down a tons of different notes and I looked into all the biochemistry, and I would love to give you some nerdy fun facts here about some biochemistry and food.
Oh, please do.
I
And
know.
we have a question, and B12 for the veggies. I'm not sure, is that a question?
She's probably
Oh,
in
in
dirt.
dirt.
Oh, perfect. Of
Okay.
course there's vitamin B12 in the dirt. Yes.
Okay.
Um,
Awesome.
so the inulin rich foods.
Mm-hmm.
Inulin plant fiber beneficial for gut microbes, which makes butyrate. Remember, butyrate is that byproduct, that bacterial fermentation. It's a short chain fatty acid. And in studies, it increases bacterial diversity, actually improves motility of the colonic. So when we talk about bowels, your bowels have to move, right? It's a bowel movement. So preventing constipation, it actually helps those colonocytes move so that you can actually empty your bowels. And it also helps improve the gut mucosal lining. I told you how there's that mucus layer. You want a really thick mucus layer. And by eating lots of fiber, you directly increase butyrate, which helps feed that and keep that robust. I mentioned onions, garlic, and banana. Chicory. So chicory is actually a little fiber. You can get it as a little, there's like chicory coffee substitutes and things like that. Dandelion root. Have you guys heard of yacon?
I have. I don't know if the audience will
Yacon.
have.
Yeah. So look it up, Yacon. It's a delicious like root tuber that when you cut into it has the freshness of an apple, and it's a little bit sweeter than jicama, but also very similar to jicama. You can eat it raw. And I don't know many fall vegetables that you can, or winter vegetables that you can eat raw. I also wrote down some fun facts about broccoli. I absolutely love broccoli. Broccoli has a ton of research on it. In fact, America, we just have the highest rates of colorectal cancer than any other country in the world. And countries that eat lots of broccoli have very, very little. So broccoli on the phytonutrient and antioxidant scale, it's really rich in carotenoids, lutein, and tocopherols, promotes intestinal mucus secretion. Again, the mucus layer is really important. And it's also anti-inflammatory. Brussels sprouts is another kind of magical food combo. I call those mini cabbages. Because they also is really rich in vitamin C. So when you think about vitamins and other nutrients, those are also versions of antioxidants. And the gut microbiome just loves those. That increases bifidobacterium and Clostridium species specifically. We talked about flax seeds last time. So flax is actually really rich in a mineral called magnesium. And magnesium is really important because it's a cofactor for our relaxation hormones, which is called GABA, G-A-B-A, which also helps reduce inflammation and increase bifidobacterium species. So in infants that have been born by cesarean, decreased levels of bifidobacterium has actually been kind of one of the key characteristics of their microbiome signatures. So I love any study that actually shows that we have an increase in these species, and bifidobacterium is commonly in your probiotic capsules or your fermented foods. So go bifidobacterium. And then charge, same thing. And what happens when you get enough of these beneficial species of bacteria is they actually outcompete and turn off the ability for invasive or non-beneficial species to even take root. And a perfect example of that is Clostridium difficile infections. So people can get C. diff infections from having any number of rounds of antibiotics without appropriate supplementation or high fiber in their diet to keep their ecosystem in balance.
Lots of fun facts to take away from there, and all different foods that people can experiment with adding. One question we had was, I think the question is, what is Kohlrabi? Can you give a description of Kohlrabi?
Yeah, so kohlrabi is in the same family of foods as cauliflower, broccoli, and kale's even in this family. But what it is it does grow above ground, and it does kind of have this like round kind of tuberous look to it. And it has these long leaves. I personally don't eat the leaves. I don't find them appetizing at all. I feed those to my chickens. But what you do with the actual bulb, if you will, is I peel it. So you peel it and you just peel the outer layer. The outer layer is kind of thick and really fibrous. And then I roast it. And it is pretty plain. Like there's not a lot to it. It's not that fancy, but it has a very high density of these, again, same family as broccoli, all these different polyphenols and antioxidants, and really just a complex fiber. Kohlrabi, you could easily make kohlrabi tacos. So you could take that bulb of kohlrabi and you could just peel it. And because it's practically flavorless, you can just chop it up into almost like little, like French fries. Like you can make kohlrabi French fries, but you can just season it with whatever you want.
Excellent. We have, yes, we are on the West Coast, so we might not be sorry if you don't have kohlrabi in New York City. Maybe we can try to send some to you.
Yeah, maybe if you can, look for like rooftop gardens and things like that in different apartment buildings or different city parks. I don't know if you guys are doing community gardening like that, but yeah, no, we're a bunch of gut microbiome hippies over here on the West Coast. We love our plant diversity.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Erika. I really appreciate your time again. These are always great webinars to have, and we will be back September 9th will be when the second Wednesday in September. That we'll be back at the same time, so 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. Any closing remarks or things that you want to let our audience know? I know you have your own website too, and more information on the microbiome.
Yeah, I do. I teach a 4-hour, maybe it's closer to 5, but 4-part series on really the overview of the interplay between the gut microbiome and what we call the gut-brain axis. And that actually might be an interesting topic for next time, because everything that happens in the gut doesn't stay in the gut. And what science is showing is that there is a milieu. Milieu means this giant constellation of things that are going on simultaneously. But again, your gut is home to synthesizing serotonin, GABA, and a lot of very important, meaningful neurotransmitters that help regulate not only our mood and our emotions, but also just our overall function of alertness. And on the flip side of that, our brains are also home to our ability to perceive stress or threats in our environment. And so that can also do a spark from the top down, where then our guts learn or are able to interact with our stress response. So I teach a 4-hour series kind of talking about how your gut and your gut health and your diet, but also your environment and your past trauma kind of shape how you are, how your body is digesting your food.
Well, things to look forward to for sure. So more information to come. So make sure that to sign up for the next webinar. And next week, we are going to be talking to another Erika, Erika Mauk of Erika Mauk Nutrition. And we're going to be discussing diet, culture, body acceptance, and menopause. So a whole nother area as well. And just a reminder, with our program, we have dietitian, nutritionists, and health coaches that can support support you. If you're interested in working with any of those, you can go to our website at gennev.com and sign up for our Health Fix program, and be able to have the assistance in helping to increase foods that can support your microbiome, and talking about how to support and manage symptoms during this time of life. We also offer telemedicine with our OBGYNs, and we do have naturopathic physicians in some states. So Oregon and Washington being two of those. So if you are interested in working with naturopathic physician or a medical doctor, we have both of those to be able to support you on the medical side of managing menopause. So check that out, and we look forward to seeing you back here next week for another webinar. This will be at the Thursday time, the Thursday 1 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And then we'll have Dr. Erika La Vella back here next month. So thanks to you all for participating and watching, and have a great rest of your day.
Can't wait. See you later.
Bye.